for applicants interested in a live call for a small grant facility on biodiversity, the so-called BEST. This call was published on the 16th of December, and it is currently open for applications. The objective of this particular call is to establish a scheme for small grants for biodiversity conservation in the EU's outermost regions and overseas countries and territories. And this call is managed by the European Climate, Infrastructure and Environment Executive Agency, so CINEA, in close cooperation with the European Commission Directorate General for Environment. And so today, together with my colleagues, we will share with you objectives of the call and tell you a bit about the past initiatives and briefly present the call conditions. After a short break, you will have an opportunity to ask questions, and we expect that this information session today will take about 2 hours. Before we start, let me share with you a couple of rules that will govern our meeting today. So you can keep your camera on, we actually encourage it, but please keep your microphone off. We suggest that you choose active speaker view setting for a better meeting experience. You can adjust it on the top right of your screen. And as I mentioned, after the break, you will have an opportunity to ask questions. If you have a question, you will be given the floor. So you will be able to ask the question directly to us. It will be more interactive. So to make sure that we know that you have a question, please mention this in the chat box. Please mention your name and that you have a question, or type the question. And when the time comes, I will give you the floor during the Q&A session. Please note that our meeting is recorded, so by participating to the meeting, you consent to that. All right, I think we are ready to start. We will begin with the welcome and objectives of the call, which will be shared by Angelo Salsi, CINEA Head of Department responsible for natural resources, climate, sustainable blue economy, and clean energy. Angelo, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Maya. It's amazing that you remember the whole title of our department. It's probably the longest heading that we have ever had across the lifespan of life. Welcome to everyone, and for those who have a long institutional memory like me, I hope there are not that many. It's nice to see that life is becoming fully international again. You might remember a long time ago we had a component of life which was called Life Third Countries. It was dealing with the basin of the Mediterranean Sea countries and the Baltic. Now we go with BEST even wider than that. So we cover indeed all the outermost regions and the so-called OCTs, the countries that span from the Pacific Ocean all the way across the Indian Ocean to the Caribbean. So it's a major step up in terms of geographical coverage of life, and I think a very welcome one. For those that have already been playing with the previous BEST edition, you will notice, thanks to the presentation that Leonardo and Anita will later do, a lot of differences. If I may point to one, which is probably the most striking one, it's the budget. So we moved from a program that was dealing with or managing some couple of million euros to a program which will, in this round, for this call, will cover a span of 32 million euros in terms of budget. So you see that we have multiplied the availability by many folds, and this obviously calls also for much more ambition for the program and expectation than we could afford in the past due to the limited resources we had. So now what we want to finance is a scheme where through small grants we would support the fight against biodiversity loss in these territories, and what we want to achieve is something which is flexible enough to be adapted to those territories, but at the same time also with strong bounds and links with the logic of the main parts of the LIFE program. And if I can mention a couple of aspects that we are really keen about, that we would like to see factored in this new BEST facility, one of them is the impact. So you know that LIFE since '92, especially the LIFE nature part, but not only, has always been very keen in delivering one brick after the other. So the idea was that yes, of course, we are there to help and increase capacity. We are there to help and increase awareness raising, and so on. So all these soft ancillary measures, they are absolutely necessary, and we are keen to support them. But we want also concrete conservation. So we want, when I mentioned the bricks, we want bricks that on which we will be able to build our house later on. And this is achievable only if in the small grants that will be financed through the BEST facility, indeed, the major part of the resources will be dedicated to active and concrete conservation measurables in hectares, number of trees, population of birds increasing, and whatever you want to name as a parameter. The second thing we want to have is the sustainability. So there is no beauty in making an investment today, digging a hole in the ground to create a new pond for amphibians, and then after the project is over, the money has finished pouring in, and the dynamic closes down. The pond is left totally unattended, and sediments chip in, and in 10 years' time, the pond is back to what it was before we started investing. I made a silly little example, but I guess you have understood what I mean. So we want something which builds today for tomorrow, and achieving this through a mechanism of small grants is far from being an easy task, because it means adding little elements together, but with an overall objective, and this will be most likely specific or customized, if you want, or customizable territory by territory in view of the context in which we operate. Or working in Martinique or in French Guiana, it's a completely different kind of business because even of the kind of anthropization that we have. So the people who will have to manage these facilities, they will have to think smartly and wisely on how to create a machinery that allows adding up the results of the various small grants that will be financed, so that you build a critical mass working into a specific direction. And this is the third element which I would like to identify. LIFE is historically and by design strongly anchored to the implementation of the policy. So we know very well that certain parts of the legal basis that we apply in the EU do not apply to these territories. But at the same time, by way of emulating the targets and the objectives of some of these policies, the way they are implemented in the EU territories where these policies apply, then we would like to see BEST working in a similar fashion. So let's take one example for many. Within the EU territories where the Habitats and Birds Directive apply, we have created the largest network of protected areas in the world, Natura 2000. We know that this does not apply, legally speaking, to many of those territories, not to the outermost regions, where indeed we have Natura 2000 sites, but for the OCTs, which is a large spectrum of what best customers will be, this does not apply. There is nothing, though, that forbids emulating, if you want, this logic, and therefore designing and financing small grants that work into a direction of setting out or reinforcing an existing network of protected areas, so that we could have some sort of mirror element that could match the ambitions that we have in the rest of the European Union, let alone obviously the new targets that we have fixed in the biodiversity strategy. So whether this is free-flowing rivers or a number of trees planted or additional protected areas. I mean, every one of these small grants should in a way or another, at the outset, when they write it, not only think about their own little context, which is clearly the starting point, but also think how they can, from their little activity or their small activity, contribute to a wider design. So this is, I'm sure that my colleagues will come back on this. And then there is one last element that I want to highlight. Life is a brand, and it's a way to inform and in a certain way bring a positive image of the European Union closer to the citizens. One of my previous heads of department used to call life the people's program. It is not such a people's program like Erasmus would be, that really gets into the living room of each of our families through the friends, our kids, our grandsons that participate in an Erasmus activity. But it's probably one of those that gets closest to the ground, and especially the biodiversity and nature side of life can get very, very much down to the individuals, meaning shepherds, hunters, farmers, fishermen. So it can touch real groups of our citizens. And it's one of the most powerful way to show what the European Union means to those citizens, let alone in areas and territories which are far from the core geographical area of the European Union, which are placed maybe thousands of miles or kilometers away from us. In those areas is even more interesting and necessary to give them the feeling that they are part of one single boat, at least politically speaking. And so this brings me to the concept and the obligation that we have under life, which is every time there is an initiative or an investment on the ground that is identifiable, if you want, then the beneficiaries should give the necessary visibility to the fact that life has been supporting that kind of activity. Sometimes this is just a signboard with the life logo and a short description. Other times it's a more articulated, if you want, kind of visibility. But this is for us extremely important. So the Life Best program is not the best program; it's the Life Best program, and therefore life is in the should be always in the agenda. Last bit, and then I leave you to my colleagues. I promise, is the fact that life is obviously not only the Life Best program, and the Life Best program is obviously not only the best program. And this means that we have financed so far something like 5,500 projects. More than 1,500 were in the field dedicated fully to the area of biodiversity. And many of those projects have been financed in the same countries, or some of the same, sorry, not countries, territories, in which BEST will be active. And this will continue. So whatever, if you think about a Département d'Outre-mer, they have been eligible under LIFE since many years, and we have a number of projects in Guadeloupe, Martinique, La Réunion, and so on. If you think about Outermost Regions, so the Canaries, Azores, Madeira, we have financed, I don't know, hundreds of projects, and we will continue to finance them because in those pieces of European Union, the full legislation is enforceable, and therefore we support them just like any other territory of the European Union. So my call is to make sure that the small grants, they are in a way or another, whenever possible, not necessarily all the time, interconnected and coordinated with the other major investments that we do whenever this is possible. So there is no beauty in having, say, an integrated project in the Azores, and at the same time a series of small grants in the Azores that are totally disconnected and managed in separate ways by in a separate group of people. First, because the small grants, obviously, because they are small, they will hardly be able to deliver the massive impact that an integrated project may. And at the same time, because the integrated project, without many of those small grants beside it or together with it, might not be able to reach really down to the ground the group of people and the citizens that they should get involved. So there is beauty and advantages on both sides. And again, this is something that should be thought about in the design of the mechanism, how it will work. So you see, it's a very interesting, potentially very powerful tool, quite a lot of money beside it, and but it does represent indeed for the applicants that will likely participate to this call a number of challenges, but rest reassured, the challenges are not only for you. We will not only accompany you like we're doing now with this info session, but we will accompany you also later. Whoever will be the one running the scheme will have the European Commission, and in particular the DG Environment and the agency beside them throughout the journey. So we will not let you alone, and we will be your partner. We will not be only the bank that gives out the money. So on those last words, I leave you to the next speaker, which I suspect it's Maya, and then Maya will introduce the next one.
Indeed, thank you, Angelo. Thank you for sharing the number of these pertinent points that actually I think are quite important for guiding potential applicants in conceiving their applications under this call. We will hear now from Leonardo Mazza from DG Environment, Policy Officer from DG Environment, who will tell us a bit more about the background of the call, the scope of the call, and the previous initiatives. Leonardo, thank you for joining us. The floor is yours.
Thank you. Good morning also from me. Indeed, so I will provide you with an overview of what Life Best Initiative, Best Initiative has historically delivered before then going into the scope of this very specific call. The present call builds indeed on the results and the lessons learned from previous BEST programs, and the call also explicitly states that the proposed project should build on the experience of past programs that supported a small grant scheme for biodiversity and actions in the EU, outermost regions and overseas countries and territories. So this is why in this presentation I will in the first part actually spend quite some time on an overview of the past BEST projects and highlight some key insights, focusing on how these projects worked and lessons learned from their implementation. And then in the second part of the presentation, I will focus on the scope of the activities to be funded under this specific small grant scheme to be established through the proposed project. Next slide, please. So the BEST, let's start with some more general background on the BEST initiative, of which this call is the latest spin-off. The BEST initiative started as a follow-up to the 2008 message from La Réunion Island that called for a specific dedicated funding mechanism to support the conservation of EU overseas biodiversity. And so following up on this recommendation, the Commission, together with the European Parliament, set up a draft concept with general objectives and basic principles, which resulted in the BEST initiative starting in 2011 with the BEST preparatory action as a voluntary scheme for biodiversity and ecosystem services in territories in the overseas, in the European overseas, and this is also where the acronym BEST comes from. Next slide, please. The BEST initiative's overall objectives have been summarized as follows. One is to facilitate access to EU funds for actors in the EU outermost regions and EU overseas countries and territories in order to unlock initiatives and potential in the fields of biodiversity conservation and the sustainable use of ecosystem services as a basis for sustainable development. Second objective is to increase the capacity of outermost regions and OCTs actors to access and effectively manage funds. And the third main objective is to increase the visibility of the outermost regions and OCTs as key contributors to the achievement of EU and global biodiversity targets and strategies. Next slide, please. So in terms of implementation, it all started indeed with the Best Life preparatory action, which was first adopted by the European Parliament in 2010, then resubmitted twice in 2011 and 2012, with an overall budget of 6 million euros. This led to the funding of 16 projects through 2 open calls for proposals. And also then through these projects led to the implementation of activities at local and regional levels involving various actors, including NGOs, public bodies, regional and international organizations, as well as research institutes. And a broad range of activities were funded, ranging from the designation and management of terrestrial and marine protected areas, combating invasive alien species, using ecosystem services for climate change adaptation and mitigation, the valuation of ecosystem services, and increasing knowledge, networking, education, capacity building, and outreach activities. Next slide, please. And then in the third year of this Best Preparatory Action project, this was also the last year, it focused on measures towards sustaining the projects to establish BEST as an open partnership and networking instrument with a field-based and participative approach, as well as a science-based action strategy. Next slide. So there were a number of recommendations that were derived from the experience with this Best Preparatory Action. One set of recommendations related to the open calls for tenders. So the recommendations drawn were that one should target small and local organizations to unlock the potential through more accessible small grants. Was to also organize regional calls to mitigate potentially unbalanced competition between regions and between outermost regions and OCTs with different capacities and situations. Another recommendation was to invest in capacity building, which is a key element to enable, empower, and strengthen local authorities and particularly small civil society organizations. And finally, another recommendation was to clearly define rules for eligibility, duration, and maximal budget and selection criteria. Next slide, please. And then another set of recommendations related to derived from this Best Preparatory Action related to the grant execution. These included to invest in capacity building for preparing, managing, and reporting on projects, both for the potential applicants as well as for the beneficiaries, to provide readily understandable and accessible and comprehensive information from project application to final reporting for potential beneficiaries, to ensure that the feasibility of the project timeline is properly assessed during the evaluation of proposals, and to provide an opportunity before the signature of the grant agreements for timelines to be extended if this is required, to keep financial reporting as simple as possible, also exploring possibility of lump sums and result-based payments, to make provisions that unused budget can be used for next calls for proposals, to fund additional actions and projects in the region. And finally, still in relation to grant execution, to make sure that projects with policy focus get support for project conception and are implemented with tangible activities on the ground and in partnership with local actors. So that was, I just presented now how the BEST came about, the best preparatory action and the conclusions, recommendations drawn from that, and a whole suite of projects then followed, building on this, which I will now just briefly present to you. And there are links at the end of my presentation where you can look up in more detail. So I will have to remain rather brief, but I will put in the spotlight a few of the most important BEST projects. So there was the initial follow-up project BEST 2.0, which was launched in 2014, drawing on the lessons of the BEST preparatory action. It had the objective of enabling, empowering and strengthening local authorities and civil society organizations committed to local development and biodiversity conservation and sustainable use of ecosystem services in the OCTs to implement actions on the ground. The program established a grant facility for small up to 100,000 euros grants and medium-sized grants up to 400,000 euros for biodiversity actions in the OCTs. Over the duration, there were 3 calls for project proposals. And yeah, in the end, 60 projects were awarded, received funding in the 5 regions. Next slide, please. Then another follow-up project to the LIFE preparatory action was LIFE RUP. RUP stands for Région Ultrapérique Française. And so that was a 3-year project, which was launched in 2017 to implement the pilot project inventory of species and habitats and environmentally sensitive areas in the French outermost regions. So that was quite a focus on the French outermost regions. And it was conceived as a further element to build a sustainable partnership to promote conservation of biodiversity and the sustainable use of ecosystem services, including ecosystem-based approaches to climate change, adaptation and mitigation, as well as nature-based solutions. Next slide, please. So the 2 most recent projects in the BEST series are the BEST 2.0 Plus and the LIFE for BEST. In 2020, LIFE for BEST and BEST 2.0 Plus programs took over following the end of BEST RUP and BEST 2.0, and they respectively cover the outermost regions and the overseas countries and territories. Both programs support field actions to enable, empower, and strengthen local authorities and civil society organizations committed to local development, biodiversity conservation, and sustainable use of ecosystem services, still through the implementation of grant schemes accompanied by capacity building activities. So you can see that over the whole duration, the main objectives have been really quite stable, and also the main means to deliver through smaller grant schemes has been a stable and established practice. Now we'll move to a different part of the presentation where I will show you the results from the BEST initiative through adding up all these different projects that I have just briefly been presenting to you. So over 100 projects were supported by BEST in 6 regions. Amazonia, here you can see on the map, Caribbean, Indian Ocean, Pacific, Polar and Subpolar, as well as the South Atlantic. Another important set of deliverables are 7 regional ecosystem profiles that were developed, in the context of which 400 new key biodiversity areas and ecological corridors were identified. And also were delivered 7 regional investment strategies with 450 ready to be funded projects. Next slide, please. So just a small overview. So I think this is about a subset of projects that were funded over the period 2015 to 2019, where you can see both the geographical scope of projects and the profile of grant beneficiaries. So to summarize, looking at those charts, about 1/3 of projects in the were funded in the Pacific and 1/3 in the Caribbean, and another third then in the other regions when it comes to the geographical areas where projects were funded. In terms of grant beneficiaries, the main grant beneficiaries, as you can see, were local NGOs and SMEs, but also a significant number of EU member state organizations, as well as local authorities. Next slide. More concrete project results. Now, first, in particular in the area of conservation of biodiversity, sustainable use of ecosystems, and climate change. The projects resulted in this area in more than 1,700 species being studied, 12 new species being discovered, 150 endangered species benefiting from protection action. 15%, that's worth underlining, of project beneficiaries developed new practices in the area of sustainable use of ecosystems and natural resources. And finally, 25% of the projects contributed to climate change mitigation or adaptation. Next slide, please. So what were the results in the area of capacity building, sustainability, and visibility? In this area, one can point to 120 jobs that were supported through the funding, 900 volunteers that were mobilized, and 1,500 people trained. Over the duration of the funding, more than 500 awareness raising events were organized, which reached more than 50,000 individuals, and via social media, even more people were reached, close to 400,000 people via social media as well. And in terms of institutions and policy, one can point to 400 collaborations at various levels that were initiated, and also to the fact that 58 projects extended activities beyond the best grant period, so assuring sustainability, longer-term sustainability of the results that were obtained through the funding. Next slide, please. So now let's move to the conclusions from those first years of implementation of the BEST program, and then also highlighting a few key lessons learned. So after the first years of BEST implementation, the following conclusions were drawn. The BEST initiative increased awareness of the global importance of the EU overseas biodiversity. The activities funded laid the foundations for establishing a sustainable grant scheme for small and medium-sized biodiversity actions in these regions. The need for this funding and readiness of local actors has been demonstrated by the response to the calls for proposals launched to date. And as regards future grant schemes, these should respect the principles of effectiveness, efficiency, and good governance, of course, and also provide opportunities for collaboration across regions, and aim to develop regional initiatives which pool resources and expertise to address common issues such as the impacts of climate change or invasive alien species. Next slide, please. If one would briefly summarize the key lessons learned from the BEST project implementation over the last decade, looking back at those 10 years, the key lessons that could be drawn were that small grants can have an important impact not only locally, but as well at the EU and international levels, because they have a multiplier effect. Diversity of needs and capacities requires a diversity of approaches that can play in synergy and complementarity. When empowered, local stakeholders and citizens can make a difference. They are key for the EU biodiversity strategy implementation. Presence on the ground and regional expertise to assess and monitor the implementation is really key. So are also capacity building and monitoring activities that are a must and should not be underestimated. And finally, participative preparation of a pipeline of projects is fundamental. So this is a bit, the history of the LIFE program and the key lessons learned that one might want to take into account as one embarks on a new LIFE BEST project. And now I will move indeed to next slide, please, to a second part of this presentation, which focuses really specifically on the present call for which this info session is being organized today. Because the history that I've just presented has in large part determined the activities that can be funded under the present call, which I will briefly present to you now, specifically focusing on the scope of that call. Next slide, please. So first, the aim and the purpose of the present call. As for its predecessors, the proposed project shall aim to implement a small grant scheme for biodiversity action in the EU outermost regions and the overseas countries and territories. And the purpose of this funding mechanism for biodiversity would be to, on the one hand, further unlock the local potential for biodiversity action, and on the other hand, to foster the implementation of concrete conservation activities in those areas, aiming at protecting nature and reversing the degradation of ecosystems. So, as mentioned before, the proposed project should build on the experience of past programs that supported a small grant scheme for biodiversity action in the outermost regions and OCTs. In this context, it is worth also highlighting in particular that ecosystem profiles and regional investment strategies were elaborated in the frame of the best preparatory action for each region in the outermost regions and OCTs. And these have been elaborated with a participatory methodology involving all the relevant stakeholders to define in an efficient and accurate way the needs and the niches for investments. So this is certainly a very valuable document for anyone who would consider indeed responding, submitting a proposal under the present call. Next slide, please. So with regard to the approach, the calls for proposals and the selection of the grants should be based on a strategic intervention logic and clear mechanism that guarantees a number of things. One would be the maximum level of coordination and coherence between the individual small grants, especially when operating in the same geographical area. Another important aspect in the approach should be a logical continuity of the interventions. And finally, the intervention logic and mechanism should also guarantee a maximal long-term impact, which is also something Angelo has already emphasized. A preliminary description of the criteria to be used for selection of small grants should actually be described in the project application, and that should take the above aspects into account. Next slide, please. So, with regard to what each small grant should basically aim to fund. Each small grant should inter alia implement outcome-oriented effective measures that lead to direct and sustainable improvements of the status of wildlife species and natural habitats in terrestrial inland water, coastal and or marine areas, introduce and apply nature-based solutions and or strengthen the policy framework for nature restoration and conservation and or promote sustainable use of ecosystem services. And each small grant should, of course, also implement and or ensure coherence with the relevant national biodiversity plans and strategies. Next slide, please. So here I'm just to clarify, I'm quoting directly from the call. So you will find all of this also directly mentioned in the call. Then there are an additional 3 elements which each small grant should contribute to: increase the extent, connectivity, and effective management of protected areas when targeting site-related activities, and contribute to the development of a network of protected areas on land and at sea. Another point is to engage local authorities and civil society organizations committed to local development and biodiversity conservation, ecosystem restoration, and the sustainable use of ecosystem services. And last but not least, introduce measures to improve knowledge and/or financing and/or investments in biodiversity conservation, restoration, and sustainable use. Next slide. So on this last slide, I provide basically an overview of the various best projects with links where you can dig deeper a bit in finding further information and the mechanisms, the way they were implemented, and the results they are achieved. Yes, you will find that there is actually quite a rich library already of material and inspiration also for indeed implementing a mechanism now to fund further projects in the outermost regions and overseas countries and territories. So one is not starting from scratch here, and there is a lot to be learned from previous activities over the last decade. I hope I was able to provide you with a good overview. And last slide. I thank you for your attention, and of course, if there are further questions, we will have the opportunity to discuss later in this information session.
Thank you so much, Leonardo, for this comprehensive overview. Indeed, I think in particular the first part of your presentation focusing on lessons learned and recommendations of previous programs is very important elements that will guide potential and interested applicants. So thank you so much for taking time to share it with us today. We will now move to the next and final presentation before the break, where we will present the award criteria and who can apply, how, and when. So in other words, all the technicalities that are linked to the application. So I would like to invite to our virtual stage my colleague Anita Facio from SINA, who will tell you all about it. Anita, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Maya, and welcome everyone. Yes, I will indeed give some indications on how to apply, and will describe the evaluation criteria that you need to consider while applying. But first, I will also give you an overview, a quick overview of the structure of the LIFE program, so that you better understand where BEST fits, since it is actually part, as Angelo said earlier, part of the LIFE family. Next slide. So for the period 2021-2027, as you already know, the European Commission has set a new landscape of Union programs according to new and emerging political priorities. The budget of the LIFE program has almost doubled, and the program still remains the only EU program exclusively dedicated to the environment, nature conservation, and climate action, and it is one of the key contributors of the European Green Deal, as you already know, thanks to its 4 sub-programs. As you can see from the slide, the sub-program for nature and biodiversity, the sub-program for circular economy and quality of life, the sub-program for climate mitigation and adaptation, and the new sub-program for clean energy transition. So it does contribute to the Green Deal also, thanks to its overarching objectives, aim at fostering a shift to a circular and resilient, climate resilient economy, at protecting and improving the quality of the environment, and at halting and reversing biodiversity loss. And this is all achieved through different types of projects. We can finance projects aimed at developing and demonstrating eco-innovative techniques and approaches, or projects that help implement and enforce plans and strategies in compliance with EU legislation, or projects that promote best practice simply and behavioral change. And all of this, of course, hand in hand with huge efforts from those projects to support the development, the enforcement, and the implementation of EU legislation and policy. Next. I will very briefly focus on the sub-program for nature and biodiversity, because it is the sub-program relevant for this info day. Under this sub-program, several types of actions are or projects are financed. We have the SAPs, the standard action projects that aim at supporting mainly nature conservation and restoration of the Natura 2000 network, at eradicating invasive alien species, at protecting other species. The SNAPs are the strategic nature projects that aim at supporting the implementation of the prioritized action frameworks, and by the biodiversity strategy at regional, national, or now transnational levels. And finally, BEST is another type of action explicitly mentioned in the LIFE regulation that we are actually tackling today. So how to apply? There are several reference documents that you should read. Maybe some of you already know, if they are familiar with LIFE. LIFE joined the eGrant IT family, which is constituted of several tools. You will be using one of these tools, the CEP tool, while preparing the application online. You will be actually directed to this tool when starting your submission through the funding and tenders portal. So I give you the link in this slide to the funding and tenders opportunity portal of the European Commission. From there, you would need to specify the call you're interested in this case, LIFE 2021 BEST, and you will be directed to other reference documents that are relevant. The call document, first and the most important one, and I really invite you to read the call document very thoroughly, more than once. You will also find there the LIFE Work Program 2021-2024 for those that are interested, the LIFE regulation, the new LIFE regulation, and the LIFE General Model Grant Agreement in case you're interested to see how it looks like in case your project is finally financed. Next. So how this application system works. You will have to use specific official forms. The standard application form that is constituted by different parts. Part A is the part that you need to complete in the system directly, and it includes general information. So there you will have to, of course, include the title, the acronym, the project duration, and so on. You will also have to include the participant information that contains the administrative information about the participants, the future coordinator, the beneficiaries, and the affiliated entities, and the summarized budget for the project. It is a very high-level budget table that you need to fill in online. Another part of the application form is part B, and that one is actually, you need to download it, complete it, assemble it, and then upload it once it's finalized. It's a Word document. And part B includes all the technical description of your project. Finally, in the system, you will also have to fill in part C. It contains you will have to, let's say, include additional data on your project in the form of indicators. You will also have to upload some mandatory annexes. Actually, there are only two. It's the detailed budget table in the form of an Excel file, and the participant information that you both annexes you would need to download from the system, fill in, complete, and then upload again. And finally, you can also upload some optional annexes. They're not mandatory, but some are quite important. So, for example, the letters of support, you might want to upload letters of support because I'm sure you will need to involve several stakeholders, and proving that their involvement and that they're interested in participating would be important. Therefore, through letters of support, you can do that. And the co-financing declaration also, which will describe who will co-finance the remaining part of the grant, the one that is not co-financed, of course, by the LIFE program. The total budget for the project is 32 million, like Angelo already mentioned. The co-financing rate is 95%. There will be only one project that will finally be financed under this call, and the maximum duration of the project should be of 10 years. Concerning the small grants, there is a limit to the financial support to third parties, so to the small grants, and it's 100,000 euros, a bit like in the past, if I remember correctly. But there is also there a maximum co-finance rate for the small grants of up to 95%. The call opened 16 December 2021, and the deadline for submission is 26 April 2022, 5 p.m. Brussels time. You will normally receive a notification on the results of the evaluation process in the course of June 2022, and the grant agreement of the successful project should be signed during the summer period, July or August. So now we move on to the evaluation criteria. They are of three types: admissibility, eligibility, and award. So the first thing we do when we receive a proposal is to check it for admissibility. And these are the criteria. Of course, the proposal must be submitted before the call deadline. Anyway, there's no chance you can submit it after the call deadline if you're submitting it through the submission system, because it blocks simply. The proposal must be, of course, be submitted electronically through the funding and tender portal. Proposals, including the annexes and supporting documents, must be submitted using the forms provided inside the submission system. I insist on this because we're seeing that we're also receiving proposals that use forms that are not the official ones, and this is a problem when it comes to admissibility. So this means that if this happens, the project can be rejected at this stage without being further evaluated. Concerning the project acronym, it needs to include the word LIFE, like for all the LIFE projects. Your application must be, of course, readable, accessible, and printable. And the page limit of 100 pages in case of BEST must be respected. Please do not delete the instructions in the application form. And anyway, all of this is explained in the template of the application form itself, so please take the time to read such instructions. The eligibility criteria concern mainly the eligibility of the applicants themselves. Applicants must be established in new member states and or overseas countries and territories associated with the European Union and or countries associated to the LIFE program. Well, in this case, we have very few, and they are not really relevant for BEST. I want to highlight, though, that the UK has not signed any association agreement or expressed interest to do so. Therefore, UK overseas territories are not eligible for this call. To be eligible, sorry, could you go back one slide? Thank you. To be eligible, applicants should have a high knowledge and strong experience in addressing the challenges and opportunities related to biodiversity conservation, of course, and climate change in ORs and OCTs. You also, it is a plus. Let's say it's not really compulsory, but it is an added value if the coordinator and the consortium members have also strong experience in operating and managing small grant schemes for biodiversity action. Please do not forget before you start the application that you need to register in the participant register, because you will be provided with a PIC number that will allow you to start the submission process of your proposal, actually the application process of your proposal. Concerning geographic location, this is quite obvious. Proposals must relate to activities taking place in European Union's ORs and OCTs. Concerning ineligible activities, this is relevant for many other life projects. Research, pure research normally is not eligible. Statutory responsibilities of the competent activities related to statutory responsibilities of competent authorities are also not eligible. Activities outside the duration of the project, activities which are not clearly related to the objectives of the project, of course. Compensation measures normally are not eligible, and in the case of BEST, land purchase is not eligible. Now we move on to the award criteria. There are 4 award criteria that are clearly linked with the different sections of Part B of the technical description of your project. I forgot to say that in the application form in the technical description, you will see that there are some instructions for each section, so please carefully read the instructions. Each criterion has a maximum of 20 points and a minimum of 10. Please be aware that the award criteria related to impact has a higher weight. It has a weighting of 1.5, so higher than the other award criteria. So it is quite an important award criterion. The total maximum points is 90, and the threshold to pass is 55 points. So I'm going quickly through the different award criteria. The first one is relevance. Here, what is going to be assessed while evaluating your proposal is the compliance. It's first, of course, the compliance with the objectives of LIFE and the subprogram Nature and Biodiversity, which are actually quite general, so that should not be an issue. Also, to what extent the project is in line with the objectives, the scopes, the recommendations described in the core document, and this is why it's very important that you have a good look at it. The experts will also assess if you have selected the right solution and methodology to solve the problem, if the project and its activities will actually solve the challenge addressed. And this is why it is important that a clear and quantified description of the conservation issues and threats that you're targeting is provided in the application, as well as relevant background information, defining the baseline to justify the planned interventions and their location. And this is also where you will need to explain how the methodology that you have in place guarantees, as Leonardo already mentioned, the maximum level of coordination and coherence between the individual small grants. especially if they are operating in the same geographical area. And if there is, and you need to make sure there's a logical continuity of interventions and long-term impact. In this, here also what will be assessed is the selection criteria that you think you will put in place for your call for proposals. Under this section, it is what is also assessed is the extent to which the proposal offers spillover effects, let's say, on in new policy areas. What is also important, and this is a bit another section of the application form, but it's equally important, is that you will also need to describe to what extent there are synergies with and complementarity with existing LIFE projects. And this is what also Angela was mentioning earlier. Not only LIFE projects, but also structural funds, environment projects, and other related projects in the same area is highly encouraged. But special care must be, of course, taken that to avoid overlaps and double funding. And again, as Angela was mentioning, these synergies are especially important in Spain and Portugal ORs, where LIFE has been already quite active with traditional projects, but also with integrated projects. Therefore, in such cases, we really look for this attention, let's say, and yeah, you will need to describe how you would create synergies and how you build upon projects that are already or have been implemented in those areas. We move on to the next award criterion on impact. And please don't forget this is weighted higher. It is expected, of course, that the scheme will have a concrete and measurable impact in terms of biodiversity conservation, ecosystem services, capacity building, awareness raising, and so on. Therefore, the project should elaborate on this particular aspect. There's a specific section in the application form, estimating and describing the potential impact of the small grants it expects to manage. Sustainability, the extent to which there is a realistic strategy in place to ensure that the project results will be maintained or improved in the medium long term is also assessed under this award criterion. And this, of course, from the technical, administrative, and financial points of view. Finally, the quality of the measures for the exploitation of project results will also be assessed under this award criterion. Award criterion 3. We move on to the next one. Thank you. The award criterion 3 refers to quality, to technical quality. So here, the clarity of the technical description of the project is assessed, and also the coherence between what is described in the different sections of the application form and the work plan itself. Of course, what is described in the different sections of the application form must be reflected also in the work packages, so in the work plan itself. The feasibility of the project is assessed, whether the work plan is achievable, properly planned, if deliverables and milestones have been appropriately identified, if there is a coherent and realistic planning, risk assessment and mitigation measures have been taken into account, and so on. The identification and mobilization of relevant stakeholders, and I guess for BEST this is really crucial, must be clearly described. An appropriate commitment should be demonstrated, for example, as I said earlier, through letters of support. The quality, the geographic focus of the activities must be appropriate. The plan to monitor and report on impact also must be clearly described and will be assessed. and as well as the measures to communicate and disseminate the project and its results to different target groups. Concerning the last award criterion related to resources, this is where the project will be the project consortium, will be assessed in terms of expertise, skills, and responsibilities, and appropriateness of the management structure. Considering the extent of this project, the budget that it involves, and the complexity, we can say, of the project, the project should ideally be led by a consortium. This is not compulsory, but it is important to make sure that the necessary expertise and capacity is secured. However, again, you don't need to build a full consortium with different partners. However, this is strongly encouraged in this case. What is also assessed under this criterion is, of course, the budget and the resources, whether it is transparent and appropriate. There are different parts in the application form where you need to include some information concerning the budget. There is, again, in part A, a very high-level table. Then you need to upload the detailed budget table. And in the application form, there is also a section where you will need to define the staff efforts, the person months per work package, per applicant, per partner. Also, yes, the measures proposed to reduce the environmental impact of your project, for example, through the use of green procurement, environmental management systems, and so on, will be assessed under this criterion. And finally, the value for money, meaning the conservation benefit versus the resources budgeted. So what the experts will look is at the overall indicative, if the overall indicative investment is reasonable in view of the expected impacts and results. So this is the value for money. To wrap up, actually, what Leonardo already explained very quickly, in a nutshell, what you need to take into account when designing your call for proposals to fund the small grants is, again, to make sure that there's a maximum level of coordination and coherence between the individual small grants, that there is a logical continuity between the small grants in time, and that you manage to achieve long-term impact. You need to provide a preliminary description of the criteria that you will use for the selection of the small grants. When preparing the call for proposals, you absolutely need to take into account the fact that the small grants will need to implement concrete conservation activities and capacity building, and that the duration of those small grants need to be sufficient to allow concrete conservation activities to take place, but also will allow the assessment of the effects. So I'm not sure, but I've seen that in the past best projects, the small grants had a duration of 1 year or so. I'm not sure this would be sufficient in case of projects that need to implement complete conservation activities. So please take this into account. And finally, the calls for proposals should ideally, possibly be open to all outermost regions and all overseas countries and territories. And finally, concerning the small grants themselves, again, the small grants will need to aim at the improvement of the status of wildlife species and natural habitats, at applying nature of course, applying nature-based solutions, strengthen the policy framework for nature restoration and conservation, but also implement the national biodiversity strategy and action plans or other applicable national biodiversity plans and strategies. Some small grants will possibly need to increase the extent, connectivity, and effectiveness and effective management of protected areas. Building maybe on the example of the Natura 2000 network or the Emerald network, to create and develop a network, yes, of protected areas on land and on sea. Of course, the small grants will have to engage local authorities and civil society, empower the local stakeholders to define and implement projects tailored to their respective challenges, and finally, stimulate the inclusion of conservation and sustainable use of resources in decision-making, mainstreaming across all sectors of the local economies and policy making frameworks. So this is all from my side. In case you have questions, it is for very soon, in a few minutes, but also in case you have further questions during the preparation of your application, please don't hesitate to contact us at the functional mailbox, CIMEA Live Inquiries at pceuropa.eu. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Anita, for extracting the most important information from our call document. I think it's been very helpful to help to organize the main points that govern this particular call for proposals. In line with our agenda scheduled for today, we will now take a short break. And we will be back at 11 to answer all the questions that you may still have after all three presentations. If you have a question, either now or at 11 when we are back, please type your name in the chat and we will give you the floor so that you have an opportunity to ask your question directly. So our session is a bit more interactive. I see we have a couple of questions in the chat already. We will start with those. So if you have already asked your question, no need to retype your name. All right. Thank you so much for your attention. See you at 11 o'clock. Welcome back all after break. As agreed, we will now proceed with a short Q&A session. Please don't hesitate to put your name in the chat if you have some questions. And we will start with questions that we have already received. I would like to apologize in advance if I mispronounce your name. If I do, please don't hesitate to correct me. The first question came from Jorge Ventocilla, who was asking about the aspect of the capacity building. I think we might have actually answered this question during a different presentation. But perhaps Jorge, if something is still unclear about this aspect, would you like to take this floor and tell us what is it that exactly you would like to know more about capacity building? I'm not sure if Jorge is still with us.
I am, Maya.
All right.
Hello. Thank you very much. Thank you. I believe that my question has been answered already.
Okay.
So I don't have any further.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. Okay, so we will move on to the next question. I will skip the ones that have been already answered in chat by Julia. Thank you, Julia. All right. So the next one is from Leonard Bach. Leonard, the floor is yours, please.
Hi, sorry, I just had my mouth full. I was eating a slice of bread.
Bon appetit.
Thank you, thank you. I was just wondering, does this program replace the Best for Life program, which was active in 2020?
Who answers?
Yeah, Leonardo, would you like to answer, or do you want me to take it?
I mean, we can both answer, or if you can complement whatever I'm about to say. But I mean, the way I understand it, I mean, the other Life for Best program is still running. But this present call is going to be a follow-up. A lot of the activities in the coming years are going to be funded via this follow-up grant. Do you see it in a different way, Maya?
No, absolutely. So it is obviously very important to make sure that there are no overlaps and that the synergies between the small grants that are currently being implemented are built and developed. But yes, to the large extent, it's a continuation as explained today.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Okay. Elise Bonneau, you have a question about the timing of the small grants calls. Would you like to elaborate?
Yes. Hi, thank you. I was just wondering when will be the first small grant call for proposals? Will it be in 2023?
Who answers?
You, Anita?
Okay. Well, there's no specification on this. The sooner the better, of course. So yes. Maybe also, I don't know if 2022 is still feasible, but ideally,
Yeah.
the earlier the better.
I mean, indeed, we have.
If I may, it's
yes.
You should, Elise, you should think about it retrospectively. Let's say that you have 10 years maximum duration of the thing, and you have 32 million euros to spend. Apart from the costs which are connected to the running of the facility, most of the money will go into small grants. So now try to figure out, since we have financed 100 projects in how many years under the previous best rounds. So try to figure out how many grants, small grants, could be absorbed, let's say per year, for example, in this geography, and then you probably have the reply to it. Do you have the reply to what is the ideal duration of the project, and what is the first time that you should be aiming at financing small grants? But as Anita says, the sooner the better, because that's where you will eat up the resources available. And we would like all the 32 million euros to be spent for, obviously for good things, but to be spent.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. All right. I see the next question is from Jack Tordov about the participation of entities from third countries. Jack, this is one of the most frequently asked questions for many live calls. Please ask your question.
Yes, thank you, Maya. I just wanted to seek clarification on the eligibility. Anita gave a clear presentation, but there's additional details that are in the call document on pages 12 and 13 under eligibility. There are a number of specific cases that are listed, one of which is that entities from other countries are exceptionally eligible if the granting authority considers their participation essential, and also that entities that do not have legal personality can also exceptionally participate. I just wondered if you could provide some additional clarification about those points. And also, is it possible for entities that may meet these criteria to seek clarification whether they would be eligible under this call?
Mm-hmm. Yes, I mean, I think we have to break it down to a couple of elements. Perhaps we could start with the participation of the third countries. Angela, would you like to explain it? Because it's something that links very much to the logic of LIFE and allowing participation from outside the European Union.
So the rule overall, which applies across LIFE, so it's not a specific thing for LIFE Best, is that first you have to determine whether the action outside the EU. So let's take a real example. You are in French Guyana and you're working on the French side, if you want, and we know that the national park over there continues in Brazil. and you deem that it's necessary also to work in Brazil. Then you have to determine whether this work that you want to do on the Brazilian side is necessary to achieve the results on the French side. If the reply is no, it's not necessary, then the action is simply, you can do it, but at your own expenses, and it's not part of the project. If the reply is yes, then you can do it within the project, and in most of the cases, or in a majority of the cases, at the expenditures, not of the project, but of the third party that wants to do the action in Brazil. And then you have a third case, which is an exception if you want. If this action in Brazil is absolutely essential to reach the objectives on the French side, then you can not only do it, but you can also charge it to the project. So you have to establish a sort of a degree of essentiality. And let's say that you have a population of a bird that spends part of the time, say, breeding on the French side, and another part of the time, I don't know, feeding, because there are feeding stations which are key for the success of the population on the Brazilian side. And if you do everything you can on the French side in terms of enhancing the conservation of the breeding sites, but the poor bird cannot eat because on the other side they are destroying all the feeding, if you want, then probably your efforts on the French side is close to, the results would be close to zero, unless you also work on the Brazilian side. So I hope that I'm always trying to depict things more than by the rules and by the nouns, by examples, because I suspect that people understand it better.
Yes, thank you, Angelo. And Jack, regarding your second question on the legal entities without the exception concerning the legal entities without the legal personality. Actually, it's a standard, let's say, exception that applies to all EU-funded projects. We have our colleagues from Central Services have elaborated a very detailed guidelines regarding the participation of all types of entities. I have posted in the chat the link to this document, and also for your ease of reference, I have actually included the excerpt from that guidance that concerns specifically the exceptions regarding the legal personality, the entities without legal personalities. So this is the information that we have available at this stage, and I hope, I mean, since it's very administrative, I think it's easier to read it in the guidelines. So please have a look at the chat. It's the last message currently. And of course, yes, if you have some regarding your third questions, yes, if you have some doubts whether you are whether the entity you represent is potentially eligible, you may contact us through our functional mailbox. We may not be able to perform all the checks, given that we may not have the full application and access to all the documents, but we can try to advise you.
Okay, thank you.
Astrid Hammer, you have asked the next question. Please join us. Oh, yes, you're already there.
Hello.
Hello, Astrid.
Thank you for the presentation. Hello, Maya. I have a question. You mentioned that only one project is awarded in this call. Do I understand it right, that then you are looking for an organization which is going to make a project of 32 million and is going to manage all the little calls, little projects all over the world? Or is, for example, Aruba in the Caribbean region from the Netherlands allowed to make a project for 100,000 euros for their marine ecosystem? Or is it not possible? They have to wait until one organization applies for the big projects?
Anita.
You, me? No, indeed. It's one project that will be funded, that will manage, prepare the call for proposals, select the smaller projects, the small grants of 100,000 euros. So indeed, it is one entity that will manage, or one consortium that will manage all the small grants.
Okay. So you have to know everything from all over the world for all those ecosystems. It's nearly impossible.
That's why
Yeah.
a consortium should be, should apply with different participants that are knowledgeable in different areas, in the different countries.
Okay, yeah. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Astrid. Marie-Pierre, please.
Yes, thank you. I just wanted to know if French Polynesia was included in this dispositive, and if for people who don't have a lot of money, if there is a financial advance, if it's possible to help them.
Yes, French Polynesia is eligible, of course. But again, we're not talking about individual small projects that should apply. It's one big project that will manage the small projects within its management structure. And concerning anticipation, this is not really, no, I don't think so, no.
No, Anita, wait, there are two things. First, we will have a payment mechanism for the main grant. So we give an advance payment to the entity and therefore the consortium that will successfully apply for this, which is 30% of the money. Yeah. So you will get a big chunk of money in the bank of the consortium if you want. And you can establish a scheme whereby you also have a mechanism of payments that include an advance payment to the smaller grants if you so wish. It depends. This is really, the design of the scheme is really up to you.
Okay, thank you.
We will check it. We will most likely enter into some sort of discussion, especially if your proposal is successful and we get to what we call the revision phase, so we can fine tune it later on. But then it's really up to you to design the scheme that best fits the capacity of the consortium. And as Astrid mentioned correctly, it's a very wide scope, both in geography, in terms of knowledge, and we're looking for a set of entities or an entity, if it would exist, that has indeed even geographical antennas in those places, because there is an element which is monitoring. So this entity will finance these small grants, but then we'll also have to make sure that what the small grants promise to deliver has been delivered, and sometimes this may call even for some sort of proximity. This is also why from Brussels we do not feel fit to run the scheme directly from our side, so we need an intermediary if you want.
So we have to wait for the big project before proposing the little ones.
Oh yeah, of course, yeah. But the big project will determine how you will launch the call, run the call, describe the call, and also accompany all. Like, I don't know, we are running now this info day, like we do for every live call. The consortium running the best program the best project or program, depends how you want to call it. For us, it's a project because we finance a single grant, but it's a program in the program. So this entity will have to determine how you set up the whole machinery. How do you inform and attract the attention of the applicants in French Polynesia instead of Aruba, instead of I don't know what. And you will have to determine how you select them, how you administer them, and how you monitor them, and everything else. And so the entity will be bound with us in Brussels, but the small grants will have to work with the intermediary. So they will be bound directly with the entity or the consortium running the project itself.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you, Angelo. Okay, next person on the list is Anne with a question. Anne, please.
Hello everybody. I work at OFB, Office Français de la Biodiversité, which is the French Biodiversity Agency, which was quite much involved in the last BEST program. And the presentation was quite confusing to me because all the criteria for the BEST program was presented, and we understand now you're looking for who will be running the program. So now it's clear to me, but I must admit the presentation was quite confusing because you explain in the call for proposal everything about the program as if you were expecting local program to be proposed. So it's quite. Now it's clear, but I must say, reading the call for proposal, I was almost sure you were looking for small projects.
That's interesting. That's why we also run info days, because sometimes what you write does not immediately go through or carry the same message that the writers would like to convey to the reader. So it's you take the best project of today, where indeed you were involved. You had a main, if you want, organizer or entity that received money from Brussels, but then managed it in order to finance the single project, which was IUCN, if I remember correctly. And you sort of replicate this by multiplying the budget, the ambition, the objectives by 10, 20, 30, whatever it is, I don't know. But the idea, the logic, as Leonardo mentioned, remains pretty much unchanged. So what my colleagues presented to you, especially Anita, was the mechanics of the main project itself, not the small grants. Anita explained to you how you should submit that project for 32 million euros, that project proposal, how we will evaluate that project proposal for 32 million euros. And then you will have to establish in your project proposal how you will run the small grant scheme, what you will do, what partner 1, 2, or 3 will do, how you will get the proposal, how you will select them, how you will finance them, how you will monitor them. So it's like financing, if you want, an agency outside the agency in a certain way. But it would be a pity that simply because of the higher stake of the challenge, because I agree with you that it's a bit of, how can I say, it creates certainly fears and anxiety because of the geographical scope, because of the ambition, and because of the budget, that we would leave this opportunity unused. I mean, we keep saying in every fora where we talk about outermost region and overseas countries and territories that these areas, they need something extra. So this is an opportunity. Maybe it's not packaged in the perfect way, like every time we do something new, but it's packaged and available. So we are really looking for a group of people and entities that would like to make the best out of the best.
Thank you. Yes, our organization is very much present in overseas regions, and we confirm the need for small grants. You know, it's really people are waiting for that kind of program. So we will think about it because we represent France, and it's a lot of overseas. It's a big part of overseas regions, but we have to talk to other overseas countries as well. So it's tricky.
Indeed. Yeah, thank you. So we're glad we had an opportunity to clarify the potential confusion, and indeed we are looking for now for the one big project, not for the small projects just yet. All right, the next question comes from Victoria.
Hello, thank you. I just had a question regarding the type of actions that were eligible. Can a week-long seminar focus on specificities, in the Caribbean territories, in the French Caribbean territories, be eligible as a type of action?
Yes, yes, of course. Why not?
But it will depend a bit also on the calls and how they will be defined by the entity who will run the calls. So unless they are specifically excluded for some reason or not considered a priority, then yes. But it's
yeah.
Yeah.
There is a need to be coherence between the activities, of course.
Yeah.
And everything, and the activity should be justified.
Yeah. So, but again, I mean, it also goes back a bit to the previous question. I mean, for the time being, that's not the purpose of this particular call. So we are looking for a possibility to establish a scheme and a program for running different calls, which may cover this type of activities. So such activity, for the time being, it's not really covered by the particular call, but may be considered under the future calls funded under the BEST initiative.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome. Oyono, please, the floor is yours. Although I'm not sure we will be able to answer your question, but we see we can try. Oyono, are you with us?
There's an issue with audio setting.
Okay, so I can maybe read the question. So the high inflation rate could limit the impact of the small grants. Oh, sorry, I clicked it away. The high inflation rate could limit the impact of the small grants. Is indexation possible? I'm not sure we can answer.
We don't have the financial officers now, but we can ask.
In the list of ineligible expenditures in a normal life project, the reply would be quite clear, no. But it may be that this applied in a cascading system where you finance an entity with the 32 million euros, and then the entity finances small grants that maybe the entity could foresee such a mechanism. We have to explore it. It's new for us as well.
All right. Thank you, Angelo.
But are there many of those territories that are not using the euro? As far as I know, all the French territories are using the euro, don't they? Anne, do you know?
Yes, they are.
Yeah, so it would have been an issue with if UK would have still been a member state. But for all the other territories, I suspect that probably this inflation issue is a non-issue, but maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah. As you said, we probably will have to explore it a bit further. Yeah. FHR. Welcome.
Hi, hello.
Hello.
Hi. Actually, my question has been covered already, so it was the same as other colleagues. So it's clear that it has to be a bigger entity to apply and then to relocate the 32 million. So I got it from there. So thank you. It was the same logic of questions. So it's clear that the bigger entities should apply. So and with big projects, and then relocate for smaller projects. So, but it was nice hearing all the info. So maybe for the future, as you said, for this future grants for smaller supports.
Maya, to the question before, at least I completely misunderstood the question. I was thinking, because we frequently receive this question, that we were talking about exchange rate. We're talking about inflation, so the increase of the cost of life. The increase of the cost of life is part of the cost rising. So let's say that we allocate 32 million euros to this grant. We cannot index. We never have indexed any grant, and it doesn't exist, this mechanism of indexing. It's not like in tendering or in contracts. So if the costs rise in one particular area, okay, they will do less with what they have. So there is no mechanism, let's say, in a grant to cover in the potential loss or gain due to inflation.
Okay, so now it's clear. A bit more.
Sorry, and thank you for my time. So we will be following the future call for proposals, so it's clear for small businesses and small projects. Thank you.
You're welcome.
I see that Anne wants to intervene. There is a
yes, Anne, please. Yeah.
Just a technical question. Will the consortium have to finance 5% of the project as for a small project or not? I'm talking about the running of the BEST project. Are you expecting 5% of what we call autofinancement in French,
Co-financing, yeah. It actually links to the next question also from Noelia. Yeah, Anita, would you like to answer that?
No, yes, indeed. The extra 5% that needs to be co-financed can come either from your own resources or from external co-funding entities. So yes, both the big project and the small grants will have to co-finance 5% in a way or the other. It's really up to you.
Noelia, does it also answer your question?
Yeah, hello. Thank you. Thank you for the answer. Yes, this was indeed my question, because sometimes from the applicants, from the small applicant, this 5%, even though it's not a big amount, but for small organizations can be an effort. So I wonder if it is also envisaged for them to present like a partnership to cover this 5%. Thank you.
What do you mean a partnership? Maybe
like a co-applicant, maybe like a co-applicant with another entity that could provide more, could be more financial but less technical, if I might say.
You mean within the partnership involved in the project? You're not talking about external co-financers.
No,
right?
Involved in the project. Yeah.
Well, I mean, in principle, the 5% should be covered either by the support from the co-financers on the entity that is external to the consortium, or by the own contribution of the consortium members. So indeed, some of the funds, I mean, this 5% could be covered by, let's say, another entity that you invite to participate in the project. But please note that basically consortium members should have some action, so they should have a role in the project in terms of the implementation. Otherwise, they are considered as co-financers and they participate in the project outside the consortium.
Yeah, probably the percentage of co-financing can vary within a small project, as long as the total is 95%. But if one beneficiary provides 2% and the other 7%, it doesn't really matter. This is what you're saying, Maya?
Yes.
What we are using actually in the normal life projects.
Okay.
The share of the co-financing within the small grants can vary between the beneficiaries, as long as the total though remains 95%.
Okay. Okay, thank you. It's clear.
Okay, thank you. And then we have a next question from IUCN, also about the co-financing, but in terms of in-kind contribution, if I'm not mistaken.
Yes, I'm actually, this is Christina from IUCN, and I'm taking this question on behalf of my colleague who had to leave. And it's also in relation to the question of my colleague Noelia, if the EU co-financing of 5% can be in-kind contribution or staff time covered from other projects.
Mm-hmm.
I'm talking about co-financing for the grantees, not
yeah.
So the only in-kind contribution which is considered eligible nowadays under LIFE is volunteer work. There is a mechanism to establish the counter value of this volunteer work. And indeed, I would suspect that many of these initiatives that will be financed under the small grants might use the support of volunteers. And this is a pretty nice way to countervent, if you want, the 5% or the 5,000 euros that would have to be put into the machine by the grantees themselves. The second part, so the fact that another project covers staff cost, this is simply not allowed. If it's another project, it's another project. So it's also consider that a lot of the machinery of the financial side of the story will depend from the kind of mechanism that the consortia that will make the successful bid will put in place. If you go for a lump sum approach, you will have a lot of negotiation at the beginning. You will establish what is the right value for a certain set of tasks and outputs. And then once this is done, it's done. And at the end of the day, will it be 95% and 5% the real effective share, or will it be 97 and 3 or 92 and 8? Nobody really knows in that case, as long as the final recipient doesn't make a profit, which is a basic rule of the financial regulation. Probably we don't care. If you establish a mechanism where instead you reimburse the small grants based on analytical eligible costs, then you are in a system where, like us, you can indeed determine whether the 95% was respected or not. But there are ways you cannot nevertheless charge in-kind contribution, like, I don't know, a room that was given for free for a meeting, or I don't know, a machinery or an equipment that was given for free for the project. This is not allowed. But volunteers, yes, it is. And for the rest, every single let's say facility that we currently have under LIFE, you can replicate it in the small grants. Like, I don't know, 100% reimbursement for equipment, infrastructures, and things like this. So no depreciation, if you want. This is a very valuable tool for most of the final recipient. So I take no comment on the fact that even 5% sometimes may be a hurdle, but I guess there are enough way to in the machinery to circumvent this particular hurdle. Considering that nevertheless we are talking about a maximum of 5,000 euro. The one thing that I think Maya or Anita already explained, like in every LIFE project, in a small grant, you could have, say, for example, two partners. One is a rich partner and the other one is a poor partner. And the rich partner says, listen, guys, I don't want any of the contribution because I want the poor partner to receive 100% of the money back that they will pay for. So it's an internal, if you want, co-financing mechanism, but this is okay.
Thank you.
Okay, we are running a bit after time, but I hope if it's okay with my colleagues, we will take a couple of more questions. I think then, if I understand correctly, we have answered the following question from the FHR. Please let me know if that's not the case. But in this case, we will jump directly to Irene.
Yes, good morning, everyone. Sorry, John, a bit late, so maybe you already answered this question. But would it be possible to have UK-based organizations in the consortium, or is it only EU-based organizations?
I mean, only the organizations from EU member states, overseas countries and territories, and non-EU countries that are associated to the LIFE program are, and UK is not one of them currently, are in principle eligible.
Okay, thank you, clear.
All right. Next question. Jorge, yeah? You have another question, please?
Yeah, hello, Maya. Thank you for the opportunity. It was a question related to the way in which funding can be used. From one of the presentations, I understood that the funding could not be used for research or for activities that should be normally carried out by the local authorities. That was more or less the wording. If my understanding is correct, then I understand it in many of the beneficiary areas, capacity is an issue. So they will not have the funding to do many of the things that the local authorities will normally have to do. And in the case of biodiversity and climate change, in some cases you need to do some research before you can actually know what is the status of biodiversity, for example, or an ecosystem. So I just wanted some clarification on that. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
You want me to take that?
Please, Andrew.
So the first part, research. You can do any investigation or any research and finance it within the small grants, as long as this investigation or research is necessary to carry out the concrete conservation measures. So if you don't know where an amphibian is reproducing exactly, and you want to intervene in the reproductive sites of the amphibian, probably better know before acting. So in that case, no problem, as long as the concrete conservation is done during the time of the small grants itself. So no worry about that, whether this is modeling, data collection, or anything which is needed in that sense. The other side of the story is something that comes out from the financial regulation. So you should, if you don't understand what it means, and I don't, you should complain with the member states that have adopted together with the European Parliament. If you want me to translate it again in one rather simple and straightforward example, if you are the police and you have to give fines to people that park the cars in the wrong place, we are not going to finance from Brussels giving fines, which is a statutory activity of the police. But if you're always the police, and to give those fines, you want to use a novel technology that has not been adopted before, and you need a bit of money to test this novel technology, and you're still giving fines while you are testing it, then we will intervene it. So you have to take it with a little bit of flexibility and wisdom, because if you read it like it is, practically you will stop financing any activity of public authorities because they are responsible for everything. So it's
Thank you very much.
Basic statutory activities that they have to do, otherwise they don't get the salary.
Thank you, that's very clear.
Okay. But don't worry, it has never been enforced once that if I remember well in life. So
thank you, Angelo. Sorry, I got a bit lost with the questions. I think we answered this one.
Yeah, I don't see.
I think we are done. Is it possible?
Yeah, I don't see other questions.
Yes.
I have one question.
Okay, Angela, please go ahead.
I would like to know, among the various entities that are represented by the, I don't know, 70 and some participants so far, is there anyone, you simply raise your hand, you don't have to explain and put disclaimers and things like that. Is anyone that even partially considering the opportunity of applying for a thing like this, together or alone or together with others? I would like to be reassured that there is appetite out there. Oh, that's good. Oh, that's very good.
You may also then
good.
consider this as a networking opportunity and perhaps reach to other interested applicants to see if you can build consortium together. Just a tip. Of course, not obligatory, but
no, I think that Maya is touching a very interesting point. I mean, we cannot, as European Commission and agency, we cannot probably organize or facilitate a thing like that. But after this meeting, if you, I suspect and I hope that you will sit down among yourselves and try to figure out what is the best way forward in the interest of everyone, because I think that there is enough material and enough money for almost everyone around the table, and probably there is even enough need for everyone to be on board.
There is also a networking message already in the chat from the
Good.
IP Azores inviting others to get in touch.
Yeah.
Indeed. Okay, so it seems we have no further questions. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. We look forward to receiving some applications for this particular call. And as mentioned at the end of Anita's presentation, should you have any specific questions as you proceed with the preparation of your applications, there is a functional mailbox you can use to address those questions to us. We will try to answer them. We will also publish the most frequently asked questions on our website once we see there is indeed a need for that. So that's all from our side. Thank you so much. And we wish you good luck in the application process. Bye.